Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. It's been a little while since I filmed a video because I've been very much in a bit of a reading slump post doing the Sunshine Readathon because, oh boy, I read a lot of books in that week. But in that time period, I have found my thoughts wandering back to a book that I read probably about 2 months ago now, so I have decided to make a video on it. Although my memory of a book probably wouldn't be this clear at this point usually, I did make a lot of notes about my thoughts about this book at the time when I read it, so I am pulling from those so that I can talk about it because I have a lot to say and I hadn't realised that I was so interested in this book and how it explores a variety of topics until I realised that it was sticking in my mind so far on. I am talking about Orphan Monster Spy and Devil Darling Spy, both by Matt Killeen. I read Orphan Monster Spy for the first time in 2019 and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought it was excellent. So when I heard there was a sequel coming out in 2020, I was very excited to see what happened next. And the two books together I think raise some really interesting points, and more than anything I was just very interested in how the author chose to write about the subjects that he did, which I will get to in a second. So what are these books about? Orphan Monster Spy is about a girl named Sophie who, when the book begins, has just woken up from a car crash in which her mother has been killed. She is a Jewish girl living in Berlin in 1939, and although World War II hasn't kicked off yet, the situation for Jewish people in Germany is dire. And she finds herself being confronted by a man in a small room and she thinks that she is going to die. However, in an uncharacteristic moment of kindness, he decides to spare her, and so when she ends up on a train platform just a day later, seeing this same man being interrogated by Nazi operators, she decides to save his life too, pretending to be his daughter and allowing him to get on a train that will take them both away from Berlin and get them to safety. This is the start of a very interesting found family dynamic between Sophie and a man who is referred to as the Captain. The Captain, as it turns out, is a British spy working in Germany in an attempt to reduce Germany's overall power because at this point it looks like there is going to be a war. So he is there to collect intelligence and to try to stop a number of plots that are going on within Berlin at the moment, including specifically that a man seems to have developed some kind of bomb, a very powerful bomb, and he doesn't know how to get close enough to be able to either destroy all his workings or to steal it from him. However, with Sophie now determined to do something to help her people and her country, he decides to enroll her at a German Nazi boarding school for girls so that she can befriend the man's young daughter and hopefully get her way into his house to stop this plan. And so from there, a story of espionage and spying and really just the true horrors of what was going on at the lower levels of society during 1939 in Germany, as Sarah tries to survive being in a Nazi boarding school, being bullied by the other girls and trying to hide that she is Jewish while she is among them. I thought this book was very interesting for one reason in particular, and I don't know why this is what my brain has stuck on, but I cannot stop thinking about it. This book is written by a man, by a British man called Matt Killeen, and he has chosen to write about a young female protagonist fulfilling what would typically be quite a femme fatale role. She is a young woman infiltrating the masses of the enemy and trying to get her way into their very epicenter by being a woman. However, what he's done, instead of making her an older teenager or a young woman who seduces her way into their midst, she is a 16-year-old girl who pretends to be much younger and so wends her way into the centre of the Nazi party by being young and innocent and naive. She does a lot of crying, a lot of begging to go see her father in inconvenient circumstances so that the Captain can do some extra work. And I found it really interesting how a man could write about a young girl in that way. Again, I don't know why this is what my brain has stuck on, because this book was really well written and well researched, clearly. However, I was just fascinated by how an adult man could write about a teenage girl in such a nuanced and sympathetic way, which I thought was done really, really fantastically. Talking more broadly about the book, there are some really, really interesting themes that get dealt with in here, and I should say, for both of these books, there are absolutely enormous trigger warnings for everything to do with war and anti-Semitism and genocide and disease and injury and abuse, and so many other things that I will touch on. I should also add this video may well get quite spoilery because I want to talk about some of the details specifically in the second book that really, really build out the series, but in order to do so I will have to spoil some elements of it. I should have said that at the beginning, but I feel like I've been spoiler free for now, so yes, spoiler warning for the rest of the video just because I don't want to have to censor myself. One of the really interesting parts that I thought came from Sarah's attempt to blend in at this Nazi boarding school was her initiation into the werewolf. I don't know how to say German things very well. I apologise to any German people watching this, or any Europeans, frankly. But she is initiated into a little sect of girls within her year group who have decided to strike out on their own, effectively, as the werewolves, and to align themselves not with Hitler and the Nazi Party, but with trying to take down those who oppose them, in many ways subverting a lot of the Nazi ideology into, I can't call it feminist because it's very obviously not feminist, but equally as a way to empower themselves and to try to give themselves more power and more authority than they have previously been given as young women. And Sarah becomes a part of them because she has been tested by the leader of the group, leading to her being bruised, beaten, abused. She's suffered so much, and yet she gets into this group and finds out that they have all kinds of plans to essentially rise up and take over from the Nazis at the end of the day. It was equal parts terrifying and so interesting. The idea that the Nazi ideology, although it didn't sit well with a lot of people, that other people could co-opt it into something, I can't say worse, but into something even more self-serving, and that they could use it as a way to empower themselves as a group that had previously suffered under other regimes. It was a really, really interesting reflection on femininity and on all these different kinds of extremist ideologies. With all the different things that get covered in this first book, it would have been easy for it to feel very overwhelming or underdeveloped in some areas, but actually I thought that it did a really, really good job of balancing the myriad of different themes that it covered in ways that ultimately just lent themselves to each other, allowing them to sort of build from one another and create a really all-consuming sense of how all the various things going on at Germany at that point, and with Sarah and the captain as individuals, all fed into each other to create what happened, what was happening at that time and in the world that Sarah has entered. And I thought this book was really good. Another thing that I thought it did really, really well was showing the moments of compassion that could come from a really, really dark time for humans. Sarah has a lot of flashbacks in this book, specifically to when she was living a pretty comfortable life. Her mother was an actress before she died, and they lived among the rich people in Berlin society, and yet suddenly, because they were Jewish, they were pushed down to the very, very bottom. But there are a number of flashbacks that Sarah has to an interaction with a butcher, a Jewish butcher, who did his absolute best to keep her fed, even though she was stealing from his shop at numerous points. He just wanted to make sure that she was okay as a fellow human being who was suffering, and I thought that having these juxtaposed moments of absolutely selfless humanity alongside all the absolute horrors that Sarah obviously goes through as well was a real credit to the way in which this book was structured and plotted and drafted, because it felt so complete and it gave it just a little bit more of a hopeful tone, because oh god, there is so much darkness in this story. The dynamic as well between the captain and Sarah is one of my favourite things. It starts off as a very, very tentative alliance, with Sarah knowing that she kind of needs an adult to take care of her, especially as she is a young girl and he is an adult man, that she could really, really do with someone to take care of her. And as much as the captain knows it's a liability to have someone like Sarah around, he also recognises how useful she can be. She has a great number of skills that he can use, and it was really, really interesting to watch their relationship grow from nervous alliance to really almost a parent-child relationship. I really loved seeing it grow, and I think they make a fantastic pair together. I will talk briefly as well about Sarah's character, because she is very interesting as a character, and I think in the way that Matt Killeen produces a female protagonist who could very easily become a sort of Mary Sue character who is perfectly equipped in every circumstance and can do no wrong. And yet she feels so much more than that. Sarah is immensely talented in a lot of ways. She can act very well. She was a gymnast and an acrobat before Jewish people were banned from going to gyms, and she uses these skills in a variety of different settings. She's also very emotionally stunted, which figures when you imagine the amount of trauma she's been through and some of the trauma that you see happening on the page. But it is very interesting to see in the narrative voice that is used, the way that she compartmentalizes various traumas, various people that she's interacted with, and the ways that she has learnt to sort of tame herself in a way in order to keep surviving in this environment. And it's really interesting to see. She could have so easily become a wonder child who can do absolutely everything and is perfect, but instead she's a bit snarky, quite closed off, talented, but she has her moments in which she almost fails. And ultimately as well, the skill that really helps her the most isn't anything that she has learnt to do, like acting or acrobatics. It's just the fact that she is a small, malnourished, underfed child of 16 who could pass for 12. She finds herself getting out of so many situations by playing the dumb little girl, by being tiny and blonde and scared in just the right moments, and being able to get herself out of so many situations just because she looks innocent enough. And I thought it was a really interesting way of exploring femininity, especially for young girls. As I mentioned earlier, femme fatales are often the people who are used in these sort of stories of espionage, who use their sexuality and their good looks to get around things. But Sarah isn't sexualized at all. She's just a little girl. She's just playing a little girl. And yet that is the thing that allows her to ultimately aid the mission that the captain is embarking on. So now I'm going to get on to the second book, Devil Darling Spy, which takes place about 6 months after the end of Orphan Monster Spy. Sarah is now living with the captain in a Berlin apartment, and they have managed to ingratiate themselves to the Nazi party and are now hosting a lot of parties with very high up Nazi officials in order to get closer and closer to various targets. However, Sarah feels that she is getting a little too close to it all. She's starting to feel nervous about just how much she has been learning to sympathise with these people. Obviously she doesn't sympathise with them, but the amount to which she has learnt to act and to become one of them is starting to unnerve her. And then, as always happens, another mission comes up. The captain and Sarah are summoned to go to Africa. I believe to the Republic of Congo and Angola, but I can't really remember, so I'm afraid I'm gonna have to be such a white person and just call it Africa. But they are summoned to go to Africa because there is biological warfare being developed in one of the countries, and they need to try to find out exactly what's going on and make sure that the Nazis can't use it, which, oh boy, in the context of 2020, reading about the development of biological warfare is terrifying. This book really expanded the scope of the first book, from looking at the specific atrocities going on in Germany at the time of the breakout of World War II, to looking at the wider effects of European colonialism across Africa and Eastern Europe. This was a really clever choice to go from the relatively sanitised streets of Berlin, even in the context of what was happening there, to the underbrush of Central Africa, exploring what is really going on in these tribes and how colonisation has set up the perfect breeding ground for these people to be abused and exploited in the name of European warfare is so interesting and really makes sense considering the current global climate. It really helps develop on from the first book as well, because it shows how anti-Semitism could happen in Berlin. The kinds of things that are happening to Jewish people in Germany in the early 1940s had already been happening for decades, possibly even centuries, in Africa, and it was only really spotted once it hit Germany because it was happening to white European people. This book also continues to explore Sarah growing up in a really interesting way. From the moment that she and the captain arrive in Africa, they are told that one of the symptoms of this disease that is possibly being harnessed as biological warfare is that you start bleeding from every orifice, from your mouth, from your genitals, from your ears, from your eyes, and that is the real symptom that the disease has kicked in and that you may die. And so when at one point Sarah ends up with a heavy fever, goes to the toilet and sees blood pouring out of herself, she is terrified. She is certain that she is dying and that this is the end for her. However, when people eventually break into her hotel room and take care of her, she learns that all that happened was she got malaria, which still sucks, but she and the captain had been medicated against it. But it was that her period had started and that she had just become a woman, and that was all that was wrong. But it created this sharp contrast between the horrors of the war and Sarah's much more human realization that she is growing up, she's becoming an adult woman, and that she had never expected to be this old. Her whole life has been filled with misery and pain and the expectation that she will die fairly soon, and yet to make it to 16 and to finally start menstruating is a huge shock for her, and I thought this was handled with real sensitivity and nuance and care, which was amazing to see. Another part of this is Sarah realising that she can't use the dumb little girl trick for much longer, and in fact a situation arises where she's on a submarine, long story, but she decides instead of lowering her age to 12 or 13 to make herself appear more sympathetic, she bumps it up to 20 in an attempt to regain some control of the situation and try to sort things out on her own. But this marks a really significant change for her, from weaponising her youth and her ability to appear young and easily influenced, to instead deciding to make herself one of them, to use her ability as an adult woman to control a situation. And it was really interesting to see that shift within her, from realising at first that she won't be able to get away with being a little girl for much longer and fearing that it will mean she loses her ability to manipulate and control people, to realising that she can do exactly the same but by making herself appear older. I was so impressed that a male author could have this much nuance and care when writing about the ways that women, and especially teenage girls, are perceived and interacted with by adult men, and the ways that simply age can affect that. My one complaint with Devil Darling Spy was that it became just a little bit too action-packed for my liking. I really liked in Orphan Monster Spy that it was localised pretty much to the Nazi boarding school, and that it was focused very much on personal interaction as much as the espionage plot. However, with Devil Darling Spy being set in another country, it really became quite... it felt more like a spy thriller rather than an exploration of this time period, and although that's fine, it was a slightly different pacing and tone therefore to the first book, which I didn't quite enjoy as much. But as I say, I was really just impressed by this book and how it handled so many difficult topics, just like Orphan Monster Spy. I now want to read you as well a quote from the author's note that Matt Killeen wrote. He wrote one for both this book and Orphan Monster Spy, but I thought there was a really interesting quote in here. He says, "It is a perfectly reasonable viewpoint that I simply should not be writing about colonisation, setting books in Africa, or depicting black or mixed ethnicity characters. Kit de Waal wrote a brilliant piece on the challenges of writing the other and cultural appropriation, and included the anonymous quote, 'Do not dip your pen in someone else's blood.' I have benefited from the privilege colonisation has brought, as have millions of others. Rather than dipping a pen in the blood of Africa, I feel like I'm trailing that blood, the blood of those who have paid colonisation's heavy price, wherever I go. I feel those red footprints across everything I own, both earned and handed to me. I can no longer live with doing so and not trying to do anything about it." I thought this was a very interesting and, yeah, I thought this was an excellent way of showing the difference between appropriation and taking other people's stories for your own, and being responsible with the stories that you are trying to tell. And I think overall, and this is just my perspective as a white British person, but I think that Matt Killeen did a really good job at exploring these things in nuanced ways and showing the true horrors that happened, while not exaggerating them and turning them into sensational stories. I thought these two books were excellent, and they were really interesting for a variety of reasons, and I highly recommend you read them. But Yeah, that's everything I wanted to talk about. Thank you very much for watching. I hope this was interesting and potentially encourages you to pick up these books. Please give this video a like if you did enjoy it, and comment down below what your thoughts are on these books if you have read them or if you want to read them now. Feel free to subscribe if you want to see more of my bookish content, and I will see you next time.